why is it that some people draw crime to them, draw attacks and brutality to them, whereas others don't?
Predators are never looking for a challenge. They're looking for an easy out. And when you profile, you're drunk, you're loud, they can tell you're slurring your words, you're not on your A game. You're an easy target a lot of times. And a lot of times with real predators, when the loud drunk is, doing things, remember, anything that he's doing, if he's yelling at you a certain way and he's trying to intimidate you, what he is doing is he's showing you what would work on him. So he's saying, okay, this is to intimidate somebody, you got to do this, And so real predators understand that. That's why they just ignore it. They don't buy into it, and they see it as weakness, and they see it as a way to exploit somebody. And so that's why I'm saying understanding human nature is so important. I can look at somebody and they can be offensive to me, but I register, I look at it, I go, the guy's slurring. I go, his reaction time is there. This isn't a threat to me. So I'll engage them very differently. I'll just be calm and, I'll joke with them sometimes. I'll just disengage it because I can tell, if I don't take the bait and I don't give them the response that they're expecting, that oftentimes it'll just dissipate. Now, if it doesn't, it's really easy because if that doesn't work, then I know, okay, I'm dealing with a problem here. I got to take care of the situation. But it's a very rare situation where you actually have to get to that point. I think training people in the tool of violence is a real challenge. And the best way to handle that challenge is to clearly define when it would ever be acceptable. And by understanding that, you're then able to dismiss a lot of other stuff that would probably get an ego reaction out of you, or you would think socially, I need to respond to this because if I don't, I'm going to look weak. And when you understand that's a game you don't want to play, and it's really stupid. It's going to get you into a lot of trouble if you go down those routes. And when you show people, your goal in life is not to necessarily learn how, like when I teach people, my goal is to show them if they ignore all the things that help minimize violence coming in your life, and you get to the point to where you have to use the tool of violence, here's what you're going to have to do to somebody else to be able to survive this situation. So I start them at the worst possible scenario, and then I can move them back. So when I show them the most brutal use of the tool and what you would have to do, it'd be justified, but still you'd have to do it to somebody. People think, well, I don't ever want it to get to that point. Then they're willing to listen. If I just tell them something like, oh, don't go to the ATM after 8:30 at night, they'll nod their head, they'll do it. And then the first time where it's inconvenient for them not to do that, they'll go take the risk. But then if you've taught them, okay, here's what you have to do to human beings should you do it, and then you show them video. The one good thing about what's happened in the last 20 years is the surveillance cameras that we have everywhere. It provides a lot of, acts of violence. What's really interesting, especially in the UK, they did a really interesting study where the CCTVs that are, prevalent all throughout London really didn't deter crime at all. It just was able to track it a little bit better, and you could see it, but it didn't, people knew fully well they were being monitored, and they still did the act of violence. So it's not what we think, that time. But for us, meaning in my world, I'm able to use a lot of that data, a lot of those video events, specifically like the one that you just talked about, that poor girl on the train. And I can actually use it as useful information to train people in, And my goal is, listen, I can't do anything about what happened to her, but I can show you this event, and I can give you skill sets and information that'll make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation like this unwillingly. And you take into account that, because again, all I want to do with a client is I can't train everybody. I just want to make sure the people that I train, that when the predator looks at them, they say, too much work. And they go on to the next person. I want you to create a life that minimizes the chance of violence coming into it. That's really what we all want. We all want to live a life that is devoid of violence, and we want to create that. But in order to do that, you do have to understand what the tool is, when it's, ever justified to be used, and also what is effective and what is not effective. And that's jarring information for a lot of people. So the challenge for me, obviously, in all the years I've been doing this, is how can I do this to sane social humans and not seem like I'm encouraging violence or encouraging a sociopath or anything, which is it's the biggest lie that's out there. Learning to use the tool of violence does not make you violent. That's a misnomer. It's just a tool. How you use the tool will be determined whether or not it's a justified use of the tool or a criminal use of the tool. I'm not worried about my people with the criminal use of the tool. I'm worried about them throwing the baby out with the bathwater, thinking that if I train this, I will become one of them. And the only group that works in favor with is the predators. They want us to be ignorant of the tool of violence because that way they solely control it.
I'd agree with you. And I think that people don't want to think that bad things exist because that's why the police are there. That's why the army's there. But really, like, I've seen behind the curtain, I've interviewed a lot of people, and the things that these guys deal with are fucking horrendous, and they exist. And there's no turning a blind eye to it now, especially, I mean, where you stay is probably a little bit different, but within the UK, there is this humongous tension running through the entire country, Scotland and England and Northern Ireland, of unrest because people are appalled by the way that whether it's the Tories with left or right wing, whoever it might be, they're all corrupt. They're all handling in awful ways, and everyone is frothing at the mouth angry. And as a result, you're seeing huge amounts of crime everywhere. It's rampant and nobody can do anything about it. So turning a blind eye to it it's not going to save you or protect you when something inevitably does happen. My parents lived in a relatively nice area in Glasgow, and there was a truck reversed against their gate to break the mechanism. 4 guys from Ukraine, or was it Bulgaria, then broke in. They used up a massive square-looking thing to punch a hole. They were professionals, and they robbed the entire house, and it was in a relatively nice area. So these things, you can't turn a blind eye to them, and actually, like, the best measure is to take the action prior to it happening. You'd rather install the safety alarm in your house before you get robbed so that it goes off. Yeah. It's one of those kind of things, and I do think that especially within the UK, there's just this underlying tension, and it's fueled by alcohol and drugs, and it's not if, it's kind of when. At least that's the way that I see it. Do you think that I've always had this weird issue or seen this kind of weird issue happening when people get into confrontation? There's the people that just start swinging, and then there's the people that freeze. Right. Why is that?
Hesitation kills. That's my big thing is with training people is I don't want to control your fear. Fear is excellent. It's an excellent. What I want to make sure is that you don't hesitate or freeze. And that's usually because they don't have any knowledge on how to respond. The other person who swings, they were taught probably early on. That's how you respond to things. Just as an aside, I've had a travel ban enforced against me with the UK since 2012. And mainly because I'd made some comments after the riots that happened in 2011, and they used that. I had pointed out in the early 2000s, I did a big interview. I think it was on BBC One, and it was a big round table, and I was training in Slough of all places, and the local minister there hated the fact that I was there, because Slough had problems with knife crime and all these. And they just wanted to suppress it. They didn't want to talk about it. And what's interesting is the UK got a huge wake up call when you had the immigration issues. I'm not talking about from just pure people. You had an influx of people coming from countries that could not understand once they got to the UK. They go, okay, you're telling me I can't use knives or weapons, but they're readily available. And well, yeah. And they don't fear going to prison because your prisons were way better than where they came from. And so it was shocking when that happened. And what was happening when I was there in the early 2000s was you had this big concern because since the police weren't effectively handling this back then, now you had local use. You had local British kids starting to use knives because, they had these influx of these kids coming in from other countries who were using knives and they were not being used. So that's when everybody started getting concerned, was when the citizens started using things to protect themselves. And the government just didn't get it. They didn't understand that you're not protecting us. You're not taken care of. You have these, you're more concerned. I remember there was one situation where you had a reality star. She was, I forgot her name, it was years ago, but she was in her flat and it's like kind of more like a condo, and she had a little backyard and she had her baby upstairs, single mom, baby upstairs. These kids jumped over there. They're older teenagers, like 19, 20. And, they were approaching her back, and they had a lot of break-ins, and they were coming in there, and they had weapons on them, and she was scared to death. And when they got to her door, she grabbed a butcher's knife that she had, and she showed them the butcher's knife, and they ran off. She calls the police. Police come. She tells them the story. 2 teenagers jumping over, multiple break-ins in this place. My baby's upstairs. And what did you do? She goes, and then she tells the cop, I showed him the butcher's knife. They stopped everything right then and there. Stopped listening to her. You did what? She goes, I showed the butcher's knife. And they said, why did you threaten them? They hadn't been in your house then. Right? And they prosecuted her. They prosecuted her for showing a butcher's knife against 2 guys that were coming into the thing. That's how asinine this was. And it goes back to your rules in the 50s. You guys had problems for a while with the mods, and I forgot what was the mods and something else, 2 gangs. And there was a modification in the rule. You guys used to have fantastic self-defense laws. I mean, it's based off of our self-defense laws. You had Justice Black. It was just amazing. But in the 50s and 60s, you guys had this gang violence going on. And what you did was that a lot of things, and the gangs they were manipulating. They're saying, oh, the only reason I did this, I went to go help my friend. My friend was attacked. And so then we went to help him. And so then they made this law where you weren't allowed to do anything. You weren't allowed to help anybody. You literally, if you saw somebody getting attacked, you could not go over there and help that person. The only people that had the ability to do that were the police. And so you have this situation where people were afraid to take any sort of action, any sort of self-protection, self-defense. Had another situation where you had a pensioner. He was like, I think he was in the late 60s, World War II guy. This is probably about 15, 16 years ago. Had a drug addict that lived up above him in another flat, 37 years old. His wife is sickly, the older man, his wife is sickly, and he would go up and just knock on the door. He wasn't yelling or anything, just knocked on the door, asked the guy to be quiet, because he was playing a lot of loud music, making a lot of loud noise. This guy got enraged, and he looked at him and, slammed the door. The guy goes back down to his flat. This guy comes down, has a knife in his hand, kicks the door open, and starts attacking. First, he attacks the wife. Well, this guy used to be a boxer, in during the World War II years and stuff, older guy. And he just, a little guy too. He was much smaller than the 37-year-old. He just, was able to beat him. And he beat him to the ground. And with his fists, he didn't use any tools or anything. This guy came at him with a knife. It went all the way to the high court. They said he used too much violence. It went all the way to the high court. And the judge was horrified that he could not reverse it. He had to issue the sentence, but he did issue a remittance that kept the man from going to prison. But he was going to prison because somebody kicked his door open, attacked his wife with a knife, and he defended himself. That's how crazy the UK laws were at this point. And it was well-meaning. It's just like, it's not the laws in theory. It would be great if the police could always show up. But the Metropolitan Police, I remember when they came out and said, we are no longer first responders. We cannot guarantee that we're going to be able to help you while you're getting it. Yet, people are afraid, rightly so, to defend themselves because it's draconian. The response is just absolutely draconian to civilian, to the people you're supposed to be protecting. So you have a very challenging situation in the UK that way. And now you're seeing the extremes of it on social media, where if somebody says something that the government doesn't think is appropriate, they'll come to your house and arrest you, which is crazy.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, please do me a huge favor before you go and head over to our Into the Mind podcast official page, where we have the raw, uncut Into the Mind podcast, and hit that subscribe button. And the more subscribers we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the show. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all real soon.